It was literally just a genuine fear of like, hey, if I go that far down south, I'm going to die. You're calling me racist. I have black friends. Pastor John Carter said it. He said DWB, driving while black. It's a thing. Are you going to be able to handle what I'm going to tell you? Are you going to get offended? Are we still going to be friends? Are you going to think that I think you're racist? You can't just understand that there's a group of people out there that are disenfranchised. You have to seek to understand how they feel.
When you say Harris, nobody knows who the hell you're talking about. No, nobody has any idea. Harris. Hey, where's Harris? They know Kamala. They know Kambabla. That was the nickname I used for a while, but I don't use it anymore because everyone thought I was just mispronouncing her name. I wasn't. Kambabla.
The Basement with Tim Ross hosted a podcast episode with Pastor John Carter from Abundant Life Church up in Syracuse, New York. That's upstate New York. And they had a candid conversation about the church and race. Welcome to CozyCorner TV, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Karen Smith. Call me Q, and we are on the corner, ladies and gentlemen. We're on the corner with Tim Ross from The Basement and Pastor John Carter, and I'm excited. I am not a sponsor, but I am a huge fan of The Basement. Listen, if you have not watched The Basement, pause for the cause. You got to go watch it. If you don't know who Tim Ross is, you got to go watch The Basement. It'll change your life. Point blank period, it'll change your life. I loved Tim when he was a pastor. I love him as a podcaster. I loved him then. I loved him now. He helped me then. He helps me now. I encourage you guys to go watch The Basement. Tim Ross of The Basement, the host of The Basement, and Pastor John Carter had a very candid conversation about the church and race. It was very raw. It was very real. It was very transparent. It was very thought-provoking. I absolutely loved it. I think it's a great conversation for people who don't have a close relationship with Jesus or don't have a relationship where they frequently visit church. I think it will give a lot of understanding. It will explain a lot of fear-based preaching that some of you may see and some lack of preaching you may see. So yeah, I'm super excited to get into this conversation. A couple of points in the beginning of the podcast. The whole thing is about a little over 2 hours. Go watch it. It's awesome. But in the beginning of the podcast, they just came in so hot and they were talking about a lot of great points that I just want to, 3 points that I just want to touch on with you guys. Not going to react to the whole entire thing because I want you to watch it. But 3 things that I think are really pivotal and that will help give you some understanding. And if you don't already watch The Basement, hopefully after I do this small reaction, you will. So let's jump right into it.
Wrong on social issues, of course. However, as I began to read the book of James, and I read verses like, pure religion undefiled before God is this, to see the widow and orphan, right? To visit the widow and orphan, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Yeah. I was going through that in the Greek, and the word for visit is the Greek word skopos, where you get the idea of a telescope, or a periscope. Yeah. And it literally means to seek, to look for the disenfranchised, the people that are forgotten, the people who are voiceless. And the God began to then speak to me and say, it's not enough to want to reach people that are voiceless or hurting or are different than you. You have to seek to understand.
That's really good. I love what Pastor John says there. The Greek word skopos, we get the English word telescope from. And he says that this word means to actually seek out and to seek and understand. And he's going to get into a little bit of why he's saying all of this. But God basically convicted him, arrested his heart on when it comes to the disenfranchised, that, hey, you can't just understand that there's a group of people out there that are disenfranchised. You have to seek to understand how they feel. How does their day-to-day life look? What does life look like for them in their shoes? What is their living experience like? And Pastor John's going to get into a little bit of that right now.
And that began my journey. Yeah. So I began sitting down with members of my church who didn't look like me, and just said, hey, tell me your story. What is it like, there was a woman who went to our church who was one of the editors of our local paper, a brilliant writer. She also wrote for USA Today, and I said, tell me what it's like as a woman of color to to be a Christian and to work and to live in the world today? What is your experience? And she said this. Do you really want to know? Of course.
Do you really want to know?
Yeah. And every person I asked, because I was seeking to understand the experience of people of color in America.
Yeah.
I love that Pastor John says he was seeking to genuinely understand the experience of colored people in America. So just for a little bit of context, because I'm not going to react to the part where he goes in depth about that, but the question that he's getting from black people, do you really want to know? Tim kind of emphasizes on this question for him, and he lets him know that this is a question that's really surrounded around a lot of fragility. Are you going to be able to handle what I'm going to tell you? Are you going to get offended? Are we still going to be friends? Are you going to think that I think you're racist? So I just think he's really talking to a great point here.
Not from a textbook.
Right, for sure.
It's
For people, actual people. Yeah, exactly.
And every single person, without fail, said, do you really want to know? Are you sure you want me to talk about this? And I live in New York, and we were one of the first states to get rid of slavery.
Yeah.
We were the big abolitionist state.
Facts.
But if you don't think
Facts.
racism doesn't exist, in the North, it does.
Of course it does.
Right?
I think this is a great point, and it spoke to me so much. He says, I live in New York. I'm from New York State. I'm from the Bronx. And he talks about how, we were the first state, to do this, to do that. Like, he's listing off all of New York's credentials when it comes to being a state that, people would think is not a racist state at all. But he says, if you think that racism doesn't exist in the North, you're wrong. It does. And it was so funny because I was talking to my wife about this, and I said, especially in my younger years before going in the Marine Corps, so up until about age 17, I never wanted to go past the state of Maryland. And then in my early years in the Marine Corps, traveling with my buddies, we would go different places on 72s and 96s, long weekends. And, they would want to go down to New Orleans. They would want to go to Mississippi. And, I'd be like, hell no. Like, I'm not going that far down south at all because I want to come back home. Now, I had no experiences in any of these places. So I was speaking strictly out of fear because now in my adult life, and haven't been in the Marine Corps, been married, traveled. I've been to some of these places, but it was a genuine fear. It was literally just a genuine fear of like, hey, if I go that far down south, I'm going to die.
Absolutely.
And even there's a difference between racism and racial prejudice. A lot of people aren't racists, but they're racially prejudiced, right?
For sure.
And they don't know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so anyway, she began telling me her story. She said, John, I could be dressed like I am. She was in a professional outfit. She said, I can get on an elevator, and women will go to the other side. Caucasian women will go to the other side of the elevator. I'll go into a store to shop. This was a very successful professional woman, and I'll be followed around the whole time I'm in the store. And I just didn't think that really happened. Driving to our church, which was located it was in the city. Then we moved to the suburbs because of our size. And she said, yeah, I've gotten stopped 3 or 4 times by the police for no other reason than DWB.
Driving while black.
Yeah.
Now listen, ladies and gentlemen, we heard Pastor John say it. Pastor John Carter said it. He said DWB, driving while black. It's a thing, ladies and gentlemen. It is a thing.
And I said, that really happens?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Of course, yeah.
And then one day, I went to an elder. We had an African American couple, Jake and Crystal Tansley. Shout out to them. I sat down with Jake, who worked at Syracuse University. He was in the early diversity program there. He was part of the hiring program. And I said to him, Jake, tell me a little bit about if there's anything you ever see or hear in me while I'm preaching and teaching that is insensitive or is uninformed from the perspective of somebody of color. I want you to tell me.
Now, Pastor John says to his friend Jake, hey, listen, if there's anything you see or hear in me, talking, preaching, whatever have you, that seems very insensitive or very uninformed from the perspective of a colored person, hey, will you let me know if you spot something like that? I'm pointing that out for a reason because Pastor John asked his friend Jake to do this for him. So I think that it's a very pivotal thing for us to look at, that he asked someone to do this for him. He's essentially asking like, hey, cover my blind spots. Like if there's a blind spot that I miss or I don't see, you can touch that spot, you can rub that wound, you can let me know that exists.
He said, do you really want me to talk to you? Yes!
Do you really want to know?
Okay. Boom, right there.
Wow.
Right there. He said, boom. He said, in the children's wing, and we're in a rented space at the time, we had a great big auditorium for kids. And he said, you know how we have that huge ocean mural? The name of the program was K-Wave. It was Kids with a Vision. And so it was, we had an artist come and do a whole ocean mural on the wall, 40-foot mural, right? He said, have you ever noticed that in the children's program, we have about 40% of our kids are not Caucasian, African American, Latino? I said, yeah, of course, I love that. He said, well, did you ever notice that when you look on that ocean mural, that there was like a family of 4 kids playing in the water, that all 4 of the kids are Caucasian? And I said, no, I didn't notice. And he said, that's the problem.
So I thought that this was I thought it was profound, one, because Pastor John asked his friend Jake to do this, but also that when Jake points out something he doesn't notice, he doesn't get offended. He doesn't say, well, Jake, you're my friend and you're black, which I'm pointing that out because a couple times in this podcast episode, Pastor John says that, it's like the typical white person answer, which I love that he says it, I'm not racist, I have black friends. But I love that when Jake points this out, like Pastor John doesn't get offended. He just goes, no, I did notice. Now, I am not the type of person that thinks that white people should feel guilty for being white. Black people should feel guilty for being black. Hispanic people should feel guilty for being Hispanic. Jewish people for being Jewish. I literally think all of that's insane because you can't change something that God already made. I mean, you can try and knock yourself out. It usually doesn't come out too pretty. But either way, I don't subscribe to that type of school of thought. But what I do think Jake was doing was exactly what Pastor John asked. Like, I think Jake pointed something out that he was also just curious to know, like, hey, does Pastor John even see this? Does he think about this? Does he know this? Do I think that there are groups of minority people that we pay attention to things a little closer than our white counterparts? Absolutely, without a doubt. And some of that could be fear-based. Some of that could be paranoia. Some of it is historical data gathered that we see just didn't work out for some black people. So some of it is trauma. But either way, I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that Jake is simply just letting his friend know, like, hey, there really are some blind spots that, like, we pay attention to because they mean something to me and my family that you just genuinely might not be paying attention to. Sorry there, guys, if I messed up the mic. But that you just genuinely might not be paying attention to. So I thought it was a great thing that Pastor John even asked his friend Jake to do this for him. I thought it was really big of him. Most people don't want someone pointing out their blind spot. So I really appreciated Pastor John being that open. And then I'm just going to jump to one more part of the conversation that I thought was really, really great. And I want to see what you guys think about this. Let's get right there. So Pastor John here, he's talking about a mentor of his, and he's talking about a mentor of his who gives him a really great explanation that helps him understand things going forward from where he was at that point in his life.
Southern New York.
Yeah, great church, great pastor.
He has been a huge influence on my life. He's my primary mentor, and he sat down with me early on and began talking to me about some things and really helped me to understand the difference between bias, prejudice, and racism.
That's good.
And racism, by definition, is a structural belief that your race is in some way superior to another race, and it brings in it also includes an effort to enforce a sense of inferiority, and to hold on to your space of privilege and superiority.
Right.
That's racism. So institutional racism is when that's cooked in to the system.
Right.
There are ways of systematically discriminating because of that belief.
Correct.
But prejudice is simply prejudging.
Correct.
It's based on your experience, your record with people.
Yep.
We all develop belief systems.
That's right.
I had, as a New Yorker, I had belief systems about Southerners.
Right, for sure.
Absolutely. And we know that Southerners have belief systems about New Yorkers.
That's absolutely right.
Texans and New Yorkers have belief systems, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So prejudice is and being aware of your prejudices. What are the judgments that I tend to make
Yep.
before I give a chance for something to happen?
Yep.
And a lot
Right.
of times, I think in America,
And I love that he said that before I give a chance for something to happen. Primary example, me having never really been far down south and saying if I go down south, I'm going to die because I'm from up north in New York and I think racism only existed in the South.
what we experience is prejudice. Not intentional racism, but there's plenty of racism. Not to say that doesn't exist.
Right.
But if we don't distinguish between the two, then if a Caucasian person is hearing truth, their fear is they're going to think I'm racist. And no, not necessarily racist, but you may have some biases. You
Right.
may be prejudging some things
Yep.
but based on not having experience or understanding.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you jump to the defense,
Yep.
you're calling me a racist, I've got black friends.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Then what it does is it shuts down
That's right.
the other person who's trying to communicate about
Yeah.
their real lived experience.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get our language
I agree.
better.
I absolutely.
I love that. Like, I think Pastor John Carter, shout out to you. You did a great job explaining that. And I love the way he described racism and systemic racism, because with systemic racism especially, he says, you know, that can be cooked into the system because of that prior belief of racism. And it's so true. It's not that necessarily, you know, Caucasian people are hired at a place and every Caucasian person that works at a place is like, well, I'm white and I'm going to make everybody who's black, I'm going to make their life a living hell. Like, not that type of systemic racism, but going off of the definition he gave of racism and saying because of people holding on to that belief, it could be cooked into a system. I thought that was a great explanation. But again, when he says when a Caucasian person is hearing truth, you know, if they're not listening and you know, they go on the defense too quickly, you know, you're calling me racist, I have black friends. It's like, then they can be taken away from someone's lived experience. I thought that was so profound. I thought that it was excellent that he said that because it's so true. I see it all the time, every day, especially in the workplace. I see this all of the time. I'll see a person trying to tell a colored person, trying to tell their white counterpart a lived experience that they're having at work. And the person will immediately go to, you know, maybe you're thinking too much about this. Maybe you're being a little bit too critical. Maybe you're overthinking it, you know, PTSD, trauma, etc. And I'm not saying none of these things are taking place, but when we do that, we are taking away from someone's lived experience. I'm not saying that every single thing that that person is saying or describing is an actual fact, but it is something that they are actually feeling. And because they are actually feeling that, we can't take away from it, right? So it's at the bottom line, it's like, hey, if a person feels that, we don't take away from it. They feel that, but they have to understand that, like, we don't want to take away from a person's real lived experience, because there's a good chance that your black friends, your black coworkers are having a lived experience with their white counterparts that you as a white person probably aren't experiencing, or you don't even get to witness it because they're going to behave when other people are around. So I thought this was a great conversation. Like I said, there's still another hour and about 50 minutes left of it. I'm only at minute marker 37. I encourage you guys, please go watch this. It was a great conversation. Shout out to you, Tim. Shout out to all of the basement. Shout out to you, Pastor John Carter. I'm going to come visit that church. I'm from the Bronx. I'm going to go upstate and come visit you. You guys in the comment section, please drop down in the comment section what you think about this. Tell me some of your experiences with church and race. Tell me any maybe racial prejudices you think you might have experienced in an all-white church, in an all-black church, in an all-Russian church, in a mosque. I don't care. I want to know about it. What are some of your thoughts when it comes to you know, some of the things you've seen in church as far as maybe racial profiling or you know, pandering to certain races or identities? I'm so curious to know. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and chilling on the corner with me. Until next time, guys, be peaceful, love yourselves, love one another. Peace.